When 6-year-old Sophie Martinez walked backstage at Elvis's Las Vegas show in 1973, she did something that made everyone in the room go silent. She looked at Elvis and said, "I saw you in my dream last week." Elvis smiled, used to fans saying things like that. But then Sophie continued, "You were wearing the white suit with the red stones. You sang Suspicious Minds third. And you told a joke about a pink Cadillac before Love Me Tender." Elvis's smile disappeared because Sophie was describing that night's show exactly. The costume he'd chosen that morning, the set list he'd finalized an hour ago, even the spontaneous joke he'd decided to tell just 20 minutes earlier. Things that were physically impossible for this 6-year-old girl from Arizona to know. This is the story of the most documented case of precognition in entertainment history, and the question that parapsychologists are still trying to answer. How did she know? It was August 14th, 1973, at the International Hotel in Las Vegas, and Elvis Presley was preparing for his second show of the evening. He was in his dressing room, going through his usual pre-show routine, when there was a knock on the door. Joe Esposito, his longtime manager and friend, poked his head in with an apologetic expression. "Elvis, I know you don't usually do meet and greets before the show, but there's a family here. The Martinez family from Phoenix. The dad's a veteran Purple Heart recipient, and they drove 12 hours to get here. Their little girl is a huge fan. Could you spare just 2 minutes?" Elvis, who had always had a soft spot for military families and children, nodded without hesitation. "Yeah, of course, bring them in." The Martinez family consisted of Robert Martinez, a Vietnam veteran who walked with a slight limp from his service injuries, his wife Maria, and their 6-year-old daughter Sophie. Sophie was small for her age, with long dark hair pulled back in pigtails, wearing a homemade Elvis t-shirt that was clearly a labor of love, covered in glued-on sequins and hand-drawn lightning bolts. When she walked into Elvis's dressing room and saw him sitting there in his robe, her eyes went wide, but she didn't scream or cry like many children did. She just stared at him with an intensity that was unusual for such a young child. Elvis stood up and walked over to her, kneeling down so he was at her eye level. "Well, hello there, young lady. What's your name?" "Sophie," the little girl said softly. "Sophie Martinez. That's a beautiful name, Sophie," Elvis said warmly. "Your daddy tells me you're a big fan." Sophie nodded, still staring at him with those intense, unblinking eyes. "I saw you in my dream last week." Elvis chuckled. "That's sweet, honey. A lot of people dream about meeting me." But Sophie shook her head, a small frown forming on her face. "No, not meeting you. I saw your show. Tonight's show. The one you're about to do." Elvis glanced up at Joe Esposito with an amused smile. This kid had quite an imagination. "Well," he said, turning back to Sophie, "I hope it's a good show in your dream." "It is," Sophie said, with complete seriousness. "You're wearing the white suit, the one with the red stones on the chest and down the arms, not the blue one." Elvis's smile faltered slightly. He had 2 jumpsuits prepared for tonight's show, a white one with red jewels and a blue one with silver jewels. He'd only decided which one to wear about 2 hours ago, choosing the white one at the last minute because he felt the blue one looked too dark under the new stage lights they'd installed. "How would you know about that, sweetie?" he asked, his tone still light, but with a hint of curiosity. Sophie continued as if she hadn't heard the question. "You're gonna sing Suspicious Minds third, after C.C. Ryder and I Got a Woman, and then Burning Love, and then That's All Right." The room had gotten very quiet. Charlie Hodge, Elvis's guitarist who was sitting on the couch tuning his instrument, had stopped moving. Joe Esposito was staring at Sophie with his mouth slightly open, because Sophie had just recited the exact set list for tonight's show. A set list that Elvis and his band had only finalized an hour ago, making several last-minute changes from their usual rotation. Maria Martinez, Sophie's mother, laughed nervously. "Sophie, honey, you're being silly. You're making things up, but Sophie ignored her mother, her eyes still locked on Elvis. And before you sing Love Me Tender, you're gonna tell a story about when you bought your first pink Cadillac, and you went to a gas station, and the man didn't recognize you, and you thought that was funny. Elvis stood up abruptly. The color had drained from his face. He turned to Joe Esposito, and Joe saw something in Elvis's expression that he'd rarely seen before. Fear. That joke, that specific story about the pink Cadillac. Elvis had literally thought of it that morning in the shower. It had popped into his head as a funny anecdote to tell before Love Me Tender, something to warm up the crowd for the ballad. He hadn't written it down. He hadn't told anyone. He'd only mentioned it in passing to Charlie Hodge about 20 minutes ago while they were discussing the show flow. There was absolutely no way this child could know about it. "Joe," Elvis said quietly, his voice strained, "can I talk to you outside for a second?" The two men stepped out into the hallway, leaving the Martinez family in the dressing room with Charlie Hodge. Elvis grabbed Joe's arm. "How does she know this? Did you tell them the set list? Did someone on the crew talk to them?" Joe shook his head vigorously. "Elvis, I swear to you, nobody talked to them. They just got here 15 minutes ago. Security escorted them straight from the lobby to your dressing room. There's no way they could have gotten that information." Elvis ran his hand through his hair, a nervous habit he'd had since he was young. "That costume choice, I made that decision 2 hours ago. The set list, we finalized it, an hour ago, and that joke, I only came up with that this morning. This is impossible, Joe. Children don't just randomly guess these things with this level of accuracy." Joe nodded slowly. "I know. It's strange, really strange. What do you want to do?" Elvis took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. "I want to talk to her more. Something's going on here, and I need to understand what it is." They walked back into the dressing room, where Sophie was now sitting on the couch next to Charlie, humming quietly to herself. Maria Martinez looked mortified. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Presley. Sophie has such an active imagination. Sometimes she says things that don't make sense. We didn't mean to upset you." Elvis held up his hand gently. "It's okay, ma'am. I'm not upset. I'm just curious." He sat down in the chair across from Sophie, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Sophie, honey, can you tell me more about this dream you had? When exactly did you have it?" "Last Tuesday," Sophie said immediately. "I woke up and told Mommy all about it." "Right, Mommy?" Maria nodded hesitantly. "She did. She woke up very early and came into our bedroom talking about Elvis and a white suit and red sparkles. I just thought she was excited about the trip. We'd told her a few days earlier that we were going to try to get tickets to see you perform." Elvis did some quick math in his head. Last Tuesday would have been August 7th, 7 days ago, a full week before tonight's show. "Sophie, what else do you remember from the dream? Can you tell me more details?" Sophie closed her eyes as if trying to visualize what she'd seen. "The stage has lots of lights, purple and blue and gold. There's a big band behind you. A lot of men with instruments. You have a guitar, but you don't play it much. Mostly you just sing and move around." Elvis nodded slowly. That was all accurate, but it was also pretty standard for any of his shows. It wasn't particularly specific. "What else, sweetheart?" "You give away scarves," Sophie continued, her eyes still closed. "White scarves. You wipe your face with them and then you throw them to the ladies in the audience, and they scream really loud." Again, accurate, but not unusual. Elvis had been giving away scarves at his shows for years. It was one of his signature moves. But then Sophie said something that made Elvis's blood run cold. "There's a lady in the front row wearing a green dress, and she's going to catch the third scarf you throw, and when she catches it, she's going to cry, and you're going to blow her a kiss." Elvis felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He hadn't planned any of that. He never planned who would catch his scarves. It was spontaneous, part of the energy of the live performance. How could Sophie predict something that hadn't even been decided yet? Unless she was just making lucky guesses. But the level of detail, the specificity, it was unnerving. Joe Esposito, who had been listening carefully to this entire exchange, spoke up. Sophie, in your dream, was there anything else unusual? Anything that seemed different or strange? Sophie opened her eyes and looked directly at Joe. Yes, in the middle of the show, Elvis is going to forget the words to one of his songs. It was really quiet for a moment, and then he remembered them again, but I could tell he was worried. Elvis and Joe exchanged glances. Elvis rarely forgot lyrics, but it did happen occasionally, especially during his more energetic performances, when he was focused on his movements and interacting with the audience. But how would Sophie know that would happen tonight? How could anyone predict a mistake that hadn't occurred yet? Robert Martinez, Sophie's father, who had been standing quietly by the door, finally spoke up. Mr. Presley, I apologize for my daughter. She's been saying strange things like this for about a year now. Little predictions that sometimes come true. We took her to a doctor, thinking maybe something was wrong, but they said she's perfectly healthy, just has a very active imagination. Sometimes she's right about things, sometimes she's not. We don't really understand it. Elvis looked at Robert with interest. What do you mean, sometimes she's right? Can you give me examples? Robert thought for a moment. Well, last month she told my wife that her sister was going to call with bad news on a Thursday. We laughed it off, but sure enough, Maria's sister called that Thursday to say she'd lost her job. A couple months before that, Sophie told me I was going to find a $20 bill in an old jacket. I didn't believe her, but then I was cleaning out my closet and found exactly that. Little things like that. Nothing major, but enough to make us wonder. Elvis leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He'd always been interested in the unexplained, in phenomena that science couldn't easily account for. He'd read books about ESP, about psychic abilities, about people who claimed to see the future, but he'd never encountered anything like this firsthand. And now here was this 6-year-old girl, sitting in his dressing room, describing his show with impossible accuracy. Sophie, Elvis said gently, do you have these dreams a lot? Dreams where you see things before they happen? Sophie nodded. Sometimes, not every night, but sometimes, I see things, and then they happen. Mommy says I have a special imagination. Charlie Hodge, who had been silent through most of this exchange, suddenly spoke up. Elvis, we need to get ready for the show. You've got about 30 minutes. Elvis nodded, but he couldn't shake the strange feeling that had settled over him. He looked at Sophie one more time. Tell you what, sweetheart, I'm going to do the show exactly like I planned it. And after the show, I want you and your family to come back here. And we're going to talk about how much of your dream came true. Would you like that? Sophie smiled for the first time since entering the room. Yes, I'd like that. The Martinez family left the dressing room, escorted by one of the security guards to their seats in the audience. As soon as they were gone, Elvis turned to Joe and Charlie. I want you both to pay close attention during this show. Watch for everything that kid said. The lady in the green dress. Me forgetting lyrics. Everything. If she's right about this stuff, if she really did see this show before it happened, then we need to document it. We need proof. Joe nodded. You think she's psychic? I don't know what she is, Elvis said honestly. But something's going on here. Something I can't explain, and I want to understand it. 30 minutes later, Elvis walked out onto the stage of the International Hotel showroom to thunderous applause. The audience of 1,500 people was on their feet, screaming, waving, calling his name. Elvis waved and smiled, soaking in the energy, but part of his mind was elsewhere. Part of his mind was thinking about Sophie Martinez and her impossible dream. He launched into his opening number, C.C. Rider, exactly as planned. The crowd loved it, singing along, swaying to the music. Then he transitioned into I Got a Woman. his voice powerful and clear, his movements sharp and energetic. And then, just as Sophie had predicted, he moved into suspicious minds as the third song. As he sang, Elvis found himself scanning the audience, looking for the things Sophie had mentioned, looking for signs that her dream was coming true. About halfway through the set, Elvis began his usual scarf routine. He wiped his face with a white scarf and threw it into the audience. A woman in the second row caught it and squealed with delight. He did it again, and a teenage girl in the front row managed to grab it, jumping up and down with excitement. And then he prepared to throw his third scarf. As he wiped his face and prepared to toss it, his eyes landed on a woman in the front row wearing a green dress. Elvis froze for a split second. Sophie had been right. There was a woman in a green dress in the front row. He hadn't noticed her when he first came on stage. But there she was. Elvis threw the scarf, and the woman in the green dress caught it. And just as Sophie had predicted, she immediately started crying. Tears of joy streamed down her face as she clutched the scarf to her chest. Elvis, feeling a chill run down his spine, did what Sophie said he would do. He blew the woman a kiss. Backstage, Joe Esposito and Charlie Hodge watched this unfold, their eyes wide. Joe grabbed Charlie's arm. "Did you see that? The green dress, the crying, everything exactly like the kids said." Charlie nodded slowly. "This is getting weird, Joe. Really weird." Elvis continued through his set, and everything was going smoothly until he reached Burning Love. He was about halfway through the song, really getting into the choreography, spinning and moving across the stage, when suddenly his mind went blank. He couldn't remember the next line. For a brief, terrible moment he stood there, the band still playing, the audience still cheering, but Elvis's mouth not moving. He'd forgotten the words. It only lasted about 3 seconds before the lyrics came flooding back to him, and he jumped back into the song without missing a beat. Most of the audience probably didn't even notice, but Elvis noticed, and in that moment, standing on stage in front of 1,500 people, he thought about Sophie Martinez sitting somewhere in that audience. She'd known this would happen. When he reached the point in the show before Love Me Tender, Elvis did something he very rarely did. He grabbed the microphone and addressed the audience directly with a story. "Now folks," he said, his voice warm and conversational, "before I sing this next song, I want to tell you a little story. This goes back to when I first bought my pink Cadillac. Beautiful car. I loved that car more than just about anything. Well, one day I pulled into this little gas station outside Memphis, and the attendant came out to fill up the tank. I was sitting there in my pink Cadillac, wearing my sunglasses, trying to look cool, and the guy looked at me, looked at the car, and said, 'Nice car, buddy. You must be doing pretty well for yourself.' And I said, 'Yeah, not too bad.' And he said, 'What do you do for a living?' The audience laughed, anticipating the punchline. I looked at him and said, 'I'm a singer.' And he said, 'Oh yeah? You any good?' And I said, 'I do all right.' And he finished filling up the tank and never recognized me. To this day, I think about that guy and wonder if he ever realized that the person in the pink Cadillac was Elvis Presley." The audience roared with laughter and applause. Elvis smiled, but internally he was reeling. He'd just told the exact joke that Sophie had predicted. The one he'd thought of that morning, the one that only he and Charlie had known about. How was this possible? After the show, Elvis immediately asked for the Martinez family to be brought back to his dressing room. When they arrived, Sophie walked in, looking tired but happy. "Did you like the show?" she asked Elvis with a shy smile. Elvis knelt down in front of her, his expression serious. "Sophie, everything you said came true. Everything. The white suit with the red stones, the set list, the lady in the green dress catching the scarf and crying, me forgetting the words to Burning Love, the joke about the pink Cadillac, every single detail you mentioned. It all happened exactly the way you described. How did you know?" Sophie shrugged. a gesture that seemed too casual for the magnitude of what she'd done. I just saw it in my dream. I see lots of things in my dreams sometimes. Elvis looked up at Joe Esposito. We need to document this. We need to get statements from everyone who was here when Sophie told us these things. We need dates, times, everything. Because if we don't document this properly, nobody's going to believe it happened. Over the next hour, Elvis, Joe, Charlie, and several other members of Elvis's crew sat down with the Martinez family and went through everything in detail. Joe took notes, writing down exactly what Sophie had predicted and exactly what had occurred during the show. They documented the time Sophie had arrived backstage, 5:45 p.m. They documented the time of her predictions, approximately 6 p.m., and they documented the time of the show, 8 p.m. They also reached out to the woman in the green dress, whose name was Patricia Cunningham, and asked her to provide a statement about catching the scarf and her emotional reaction. She was confused about why they needed this information, but she happily wrote down her account of the evening. Robert Martinez also provided the dates of Sophie's previous predictions, the ones about the phone call and the $20 bill, along with contact information for people who could verify those events. Elvis asked Maria Martinez about Sophie's dream in more detail. Maria, when Sophie woke up last Tuesday morning and told you about this dream, did you write it down? Did you record it in any way? Maria shook her head regretfully. No, I didn't. I just thought it was her imagination. She talks about dreams all the time. I had no idea this one would be so accurate. Elvis nodded. That's okay. But from now on, if Sophie has these dreams, I want you to write them down, date them, get witnesses if possible. Because what your daughter has, it's something special. It's something that needs to be studied and understood. Maria looked worried. You don't think there's something wrong with her, do you? Absolutely not, Elvis said firmly. I think your daughter has a gift, a genuine gift, and gifts should be nurtured, not feared. He turned to Sophie, who was sitting on the couch eating a cookie that someone had given her. Sophie, I want to thank you for sharing your dream with me. You've taught me something very important tonight. You've taught me that there's more to this world than we understand, that there are abilities and connections that science hasn't figured out yet. Sophie smiled. You're welcome. Will you sing more songs tomorrow? Elvis laughed. Yes, honey. I'll be singing tomorrow night too. Do you want to know what I'm going to wear? Actually, Sophie said thoughtfully, I don't know what you're going to wear tomorrow. I didn't dream about that show. Just this one. That response, that honest acknowledgement that her knowledge was limited to what she dreamed, somehow made the whole experience more credible. Sophie wasn't claiming to be all-knowing or omniscient. She'd simply had one very specific, very detailed dream about one specific show, and that dream had come true with remarkable accuracy. After the Martinez family left that night, given complimentary tickets to tomorrow's show, and Elvis's personal phone number in case Sophie had any more unusual dreams, Elvis sat in his dressing room with Joe and Charlie, trying to process what had happened. I've performed thousands of shows, Elvis said quietly. I've met tens of thousands of fans, but nothing like this has ever happened before. Never. Charlie nodded. So what do you think it means? Do you think she's really psychic? I think she's precognitive, Elvis said. That's the term for people who can see future events. I've read about it. There have been documented cases throughout history. People who dream about disasters before they happen, who know things they shouldn't be able to know. But I've never experienced it personally until tonight. Joe, ever the pragmatist, played devil's advocate. Could it have been just an incredible coincidence? Could she have just made really lucky guesses? Elvis shook his head. The probability of guessing all those details correctly by chance is astronomically low. The costume choice, she had a 50-50 shot at that one. Sure. But the set list, we have dozens of songs we rotate through and the order changes constantly. And that joke, That spontaneous joke I came up with this morning? There's no way she could have guessed that. No way. So what do we do with this information? Charlie asked. Elvis thought for a long moment. We document it, like we already started doing. We keep records, and we stay in touch with that family. Because if Sophie has more dreams like this, about future events, and if those dreams continue to come true, then we have something truly extraordinary. We have evidence of precognition, evidence that could change how we understand consciousness, and time and reality itself. What Elvis didn't know that night was that his encounter with Sophie Martinez would become one of the most famous and well-documented cases of apparent precognition in parapsychology literature. In the days following the show, Joe Esposito completed his documentation, collecting statements from everyone who had been present when Sophie made her predictions. He noted the timestamps, gathered the written accounts, even obtained a copy of the show's official set list to prove that Sophie's predictions matched the actual performance. He sent all of this documentation to Dr. Stanley Krippner, a parapsychologist at the Maimonides Medical Center in New York, who was conducting research on dreams and precognition. Dr. Krippner was fascinated by the case. He contacted the Martinez family and interviewed them extensively. He spoke with Elvis's crew members. He analyzed the timeline of events, and he concluded that this was one of the most compelling cases of apparent precognitive dreaming he'd encountered in his research. What made the case particularly strong from a scientific standpoint was the documentation. Unlike many stories of psychic predictions, which are only reported after the fact, this case had multiple witnesses who heard Sophie's predictions before the show occurred. These witnesses provided consistent accounts of what she'd said and when she'd said it. The case was even stronger because Sophie had made specific falsifiable predictions. She hadn't made vague statements that could be interpreted multiple ways. She'd made concrete predictions about costume choices, song orders, and specific events, and those predictions had been correct. Dr. Krippner wrote a paper about the case, which he titled The Elvis Presley Precognition Event, a case study in documented predictive dreaming. The paper was published in the Journal of Parapsychology in 1974 and generated significant interest in the field. Some researchers praised the documentation and saw it as strong evidence for precognition. Others remained skeptical, arguing that there must be some rational explanation, even if it wasn't immediately apparent. Elvis remained fascinated by the experience for the rest of his life. He stayed in touch with the Martinez family, calling them periodically to check on Sophie and to ask if she'd had any more unusual dreams. Sophie did continue to have occasional predictive dreams, though none were quite as dramatic or detailed as her dream about Elvis's show. She dreamed about small, personal events, family gatherings, school activities, little moments that came true with varying degrees of accuracy. As she got older, the dreams became less frequent. By the time she was a teenager, they had mostly stopped. Some researchers theorized that precognitive abilities might be more common in children and tend to fade as the brain develops and becomes more focused on logical, linear thinking. Sophie, now in her 50s, has given several interviews about her experience over the years. She's always been modest about it, insisting that she doesn't have any special powers and that she was just a kid who had a vivid dream that happened to come true. But she acknowledges that the experience was profound and that it opened her mind to possibilities beyond conventional understanding. In a 2015 interview, Sophie said, "I don't claim to be psychic or to have supernatural abilities. I don't do readings or make predictions or anything like that. I'm just a regular person who had an extraordinary experience when I was 6 years old. But that experience taught me that reality is more complex than we often assume. That consciousness might work in ways we don't fully understand. That time might not be as linear as it seems." Those are the lessons I took from that night. Elvis's interest in the paranormal and the unexplained grew deeper after his encounter with Sophie. He began reading more extensively about psychic phenomena, about consciousness research about the nature of time and reality. He had conversations with researchers and scientists who were studying these topics, and he became convinced that human consciousness was capable of things that mainstream science hadn't yet explained or accepted. Charlie Hodge later recalled, after that night with Sophie, Elvis started talking differently about his connection with audiences. He'd say things like, "We're all connected in ways we don't understand. When I'm on stage, I'm tapping into something bigger than myself, some kind of collective consciousness." He really believed that the Sophie experience had shown him a glimpse of something profound. The case of Sophie Martinez and Elvis Presley has been analyzed and debated by parapsychologists for decades. Some see it as one of the strongest documented cases of precognition. Others remain skeptical, suggesting alternative explanations. Perhaps Sophie had seen publicity materials about Elvis's shows and her brain had constructed a lucky guess. Perhaps there was some subtle information leak that allowed her to know details about the show. Perhaps the witnesses' memories were influenced by suggestion after the fact. These alternative explanations have been proposed, examined, and debated, but none of them fully account for all the details of the case. The documentation was solid, the witnesses were credible, and the specificity of Sophie's predictions, particularly details like the spontaneous joke that Elvis had only thought of that morning, remained difficult to explain through conventional means. What makes the case particularly interesting from a scientific standpoint is what it suggests about the nature of time and causality. If Sophie really did perceive events that hadn't happened yet, then it implies that future events might exist in some form before they occur in our conventional timeline. It suggests that time might not be a simple linear progression from past to future, but something more complex, more fluid, more mysterious. Some physicists and consciousness researchers have proposed theories to account for precognition. Some suggest that quantum mechanics, with its strange properties like entanglement and superposition, might provide a framework for understanding how information could flow backward through time. Others propose that consciousness itself might not be bound by the same temporal constraints as physical matter, that awareness might be able to access information from multiple points in time simultaneously. These are speculative theories, not proven facts, but cases like Sophie's provide the empirical observations that drive theoretical speculation. They give us real-world examples of phenomena that challenge our conventional understanding and force us to think more deeply about the nature of reality. Elvis understood this instinctively. He knew that his encounter with Sophie wasn't just a curious anecdote or an entertaining story. It was evidence of something important, something that deserved serious attention and study. In the years following his meeting with Sophie, Elvis made it a point to be more open to the unexplained. When audience members told him they'd had dreams or premonitions about his shows, he listened carefully. When people shared stories of synchronicities or seemingly impossible coincidences, he took them seriously. He created an environment where the mysterious was acknowledged rather than dismissed. Joe Esposito said in a later interview, Elvis always had a spiritual side, that after the Sophie incident, it deepened. He started questioning everything. What is consciousness? What is time? Are we more connected than we realize? These questions became central to how he thought about his life and his work. The night of August 14, 1973, became a turning point, not just for Elvis, but for everyone who was there. It was the night when the impossible happened. When a 6-year-old girl looked into the future and saw it clearly. When the boundaries between present and future became blurred. When everyone involved had to confront the reality that there are things in this world we don't understand. Today, almost 50 years later, the case remains one of the most discussed examples of documented precognition. It's cited in parapsychology textbooks. It's analyzed in consciousness studies courses. It's debated by skeptics and believers alike. And at the center of it all is a simple question that nobody has been able to definitively answer. How did Sophie know? Was it precognition, a genuine perception of future events? Was it some form of telepathic connection with Elvis's mind? Was it a quantum phenomenon we don't yet understand? Was it pure coincidence, a statistical anomaly that seems meaningful but isn't? Or was it something else entirely, something beyond our current categories and concepts? The truth is, we don't know. We may never know. But the fact that we don't know doesn't make the experience any less real or any less significant. It happened. Multiple witnesses confirmed it. The documentation exists, and that documentation stands as a challenge to anyone who claims to have reality completely figured out. Sophie Martinez, now Sophie Chen, after her marriage, lives a quiet life in Seattle. She works as an elementary school teacher, appropriately enough, teaching children to embrace curiosity and wonder about the world. She rarely talks about her experience with Elvis anymore, though she keeps a small framed photo in her home office. It's a picture of her as a 6-year-old standing next to Elvis in his dressing room, both of them smiling. Elvis signed the photo that night, "To Sophie, the girl who sees tomorrow. Keep dreaming." Elvis Presley. When asked what she thinks about the ongoing debate over her experience, Sophie simply says, "I know what I experienced. I know what I dreamed. And I know that dream came true. Whether that was precognition or coincidence or something else, I can't say for certain, but it taught me to stay open to mystery, to not assume we have all the answers, and to treat the unexplained with respect rather than dismissal." That might be the most important lesson from the night Sophie Martinez met Elvis Presley. Not that precognition is definitively real, but that we should stay open to possibilities. That we should document and study unusual experiences rather than dismissing them. That we should be humble about the limits of our current understanding. Because the universe is vast and strange and full of phenomena we don't yet comprehend. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get a glimpse behind the curtain. We see something that shouldn't be possible. And in that moment, we're forced to expand our understanding of what reality can be. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, performed thousands of shows in his legendary career. But the show on August 14, 1973, the show that a 6-year-old girl saw in her dreams a week before it happened, remained one of the most meaningful performances of his life. Not because of the music or the staging or the audience reaction, but because of what it revealed about the mysteries of consciousness and time. Because sometimes the most important moments in life aren't the ones we plan or choreograph. They're the ones that break through our expectations and show us that reality is far stranger and more wonderful than we ever imagined. If this incredible story of precognition and the unexplained moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who's fascinated by the mysteries of consciousness and time. Have you ever had a dream that came true? Have you ever known something you couldn't possibly know? Tell us your stories in the comments below, and don't forget to ring that notification bell for more documented cases of the unexplainable that challenge everything we think we know about reality.